The median bank account balance in America is $8,000, not 80,000, 8. If you have more than that sitting in your checking or savings account right now, you are statistically wealthier than half the country. Let that sink in for a second. Half of all American households have less than 8 grand to their name in liquid savings. And yet, you know what's wild? The economy is supposedly doing great. The stock market hit record highs in 2025. Unemployment is low, inflation has cooled off, and yet, if you're watching this video, there's a decent chance you feel like you're drowning financially. You're not crazy. The numbers tell a story that the headlines don't. I'm Nick, and I've spent the last few months digging through Federal Reserve data, consumer finance reports, and surveys that paint a picture of American wealth that will probably shock you. Because while the headlines scream about economic growth and rising wages, the numbers beneath the surface tell a completely different story. Let's talk about what's actually happening in the average American's bank account in 2026, and more importantly, where you stand in all of this. Here's the stat that should make your stomach drop. 67% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck right now, 2/3 of the country. And before you assume this is just minimum wage workers struggling to get by, think again. This includes people making 6 figures, lawyers, engineers, mid-level managers, all trapped in the same cycle. They get paid, the money evaporates into rent or mortgage, car payments, groceries that somehow cost double what they did 4 years ago, and by the time the next paycheck rolls around, they're at zero again. It's not a poverty problem, it's a structural trap that's swallowing the middle class whole. But it gets darker. Nearly 1 in 4 Americans, 24% to be exact, have literally zero emergency savings. Nothing. Not a rainy day fund, not a cushion, nothing between them and financial catastrophe. If the car breaks down, if they get sick, if the water heater explodes, they're immediately in crisis mode. And it's not because they're reckless, it's because there's nothing left over to save after covering the basics. Meanwhile, 54% of households have no dedicated retirement savings at all. None. They're not planning for the future because they can't afford to survive the present. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Inflation. You've probably heard that inflation has come down, that things are getting better. Technically, that's true. The rate of increase has slowed. But here's what they don't tell you. The damage is already done. Prices for goods and services are roughly 25% higher today than they were in 2020. A 25% markup on everything. Your grocery bill, your insurance, your rent, all of it is a quarter more expensive than it was just a few years ago. And wages? They didn't jump 25%. Most people got maybe a 10% raise if they were lucky. The gap between what things cost and what people earn has widened into a chasm, and nobody's building a bridge. The vibe is off, and people know it. 32% of Americans expect their personal finances to get worse in 2026. That's the highest level of financial pessimism recorded since 2018. Think about that. Despite all the good news on paper, 1/3 of the country is looking at the year ahead and thinking, I'm about to get crushed. They're not wrong. The split-screen economy is real. If you own assets, stocks, real estate, you probably had a great 2025. Your net worth went up on paper. But if you live off wages alone, if you're trading your time for a paycheck and trying to make it stretch, you're statistically likely to be falling further behind. And here's the kicker. Americans were asked what they'd need to feel wealthy in 2026. The number they came up with? They get $2.5 million in net worth. That's not retire and never work again. That's just feel wealthy money. The number people say they need to retire comfortably has hit $1.26 million. Let that sink in. The average person believes they need over $1 million saved just to stop working without panicking. And yet, as we're about to see, the actual retirement savings of most Americans is nowhere close to that, not even in the same galaxy. So where do you actually stand? Because here's the thing, averages lie. When you hear that the average American has $91,000 saved to retirement at age 40, that sounds decent, right? But that number is skewed by the people at the top. The guy with $2 million saved drags the average up, making everyone else look better than they are. What you actually want to know is the median, the point where half the people are above and half are below, the real middle. Let's break it down by age, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. If you're under 25, the median retirement savings is about $2,800. That's not a typo. $2,800. For people aged 25 to 34, it jumps to around $15,000. Still not enough to retire on, obviously, but it's a start. By 35 to 44, the median hits about $35,500. Now, if you're 40 years old and you've got $40,000 saved, you might look at the average of $91,000 and feel like you're way behind. But you're not. You're actually ahead of the median American. You're doing better than half the country. Things get slightly better as people age. The 45 to 54 crowd has a median of about $61,500 saved. People aged 55 to 64, the ones staring retirement in the face, have a median of $87,500. And let me be clear, okay? $88,000 is not enough to retire on. If you're pulling 4% a year, that's $3,500 annually. That's $291 a month. You can't live on that. Social Security helps, sure, but an average Social Security check is only about $1,900 a month. Add that to your savings drawdown, and you're looking at maybe $2,200 a month to live on. That's tight, really tight. Now let's talk about debt, because savings are only half the equation. Debt is the anchor dragging everyone down, and it's distributed unevenly across generations. Gen Z, the youngest adults aged 18 to 28, have an average debt load of about $34,000. That sounds manageable until you realize it's mostly student loans and car payments, and they're just starting their careers. Millennials aged 29 to 44 are carrying an average of $132,000 in debt. Mortgages are the big driver here, but also student loans that never seem to go away, and credit cards filling the gap between income and expenses. But the real debt champions, Gen X, people aged 45 to 60, are carrying an average of $158,000 in debt, the highest of any generation. They're the sandwich generation, paying for their kids' college while also helping their aging parents, all while trying to save for their own retirement that's rapidly approaching. They're getting squeezed from both ends, and the numbers prove it. Baby boomers, aged 61 to 79, have an average debt of about $92,000, lower than Gen X, but still significant, especially for people who should theoretically be winding down. Many are still paying off mortgages or helping family members financially, and it's eating into whatever retirement cushion they manage to build. And then there's credit card debt, the trap that never stops taking. The average credit card balance for people who carry debt is nearly $7,000. But here's the stat that should terrify you. 46% of credit card holders do not pay off their bill in full every month. Nearly half the country is paying 20% interest or more on their balances. That's not debt. That's a tax on being broke. If you're carrying a $7,000 balance at 22% interest and only making minimum payments of $140 a month, you'll be paying that off for years while the bank collects thousands in interest. It's designed to keep you stuck. So how do you compare? Are you ahead of the median or behind? Are you part of the 67% living paycheck to paycheck? Or have you managed to carve out some breathing room? The answer matters, because understanding where you stand is the first step to changing it. And there's more to unpack here, because the numbers get even more revealing when you zoom in on the financial behaviors and choices people are making right now. Let's dig into what people are actually doing with their money right now, because the behavior patterns reveal something fascinating. It's not just about how much you have, it's about the choices being made under financial pressure. And those choices are creating a cascade effect that's making everything worse. First, the savings rate. Americans are currently saving about 3.5%. That's pathetically low. Historically, Americans save closer to 8 or 9%. During the pandemic, when stimulus checks hit and people couldn't spend on travel or restaurants, the savings rates briefly spiked to over 30%. But now we're back to barely saving anything. That 3.5% tells you everything you need to know. People aren't choosing to save less, they can't afford to save more. Every dollar is already allocated before it hits the bank account. Housing is the other massive pressure point that's squeezing people from both sides. If you're renting, you're getting destroyed. Nearly 50% of renters in 2025 reported difficulty paying their monthly rent, not struggling to save for a down payment, struggling to make rent at all. And if you're a homeowner, you might own your house, but you're probably locked in by your mortgage rate. If you bought when rates were 3%, you can't move now because selling means financing a new place at 7%. You're trapped. Your house isn't an asset you can leverage, it's a golden cage. The wealth gap isn't just widening, it's becoming a chasm. The people who own assets, who bought homes before prices exploded, who have retirement accounts invested in the market, those people are doing fine, better than fine. Their net worth grew significantly in 2025. But if you don't own assets, if you're starting from zero trying to get a foothold, you're running uphill into a hurricane. The starting line keeps moving further away. Here's what really gets me. The benchmark numbers we talked about earlier, those medians for retirement savings, those debt averages, those aren't aspirational goals. Those are survival metrics, and half the country isn't even hitting them. If you're 45 years old with $50,000 saved for retirement, the moment your paycheck hits your bank account, you have exactly 15 seconds before your brain starts making terrible financial decisions. I'm not kidding. 15 seconds is all it takes for most people to mentally spend money they haven't even seen yet. Your brain starts calculating how much you can blow on that new gadget, how many times you can order takeout this month, or whether you can finally afford those shoes that have been sitting in your online shopping cart since last Tuesday. But what if I told you that those same 15 seconds could be the difference between staying broke forever and actually building real wealth? What if there was a simple routine you could follow every single time you get paid that would automatically put you ahead of 90% of people financially? My name is Nick, and I've spent years helping people figure out what to do with their money the moment it shows up in their accounts. If you're tired of wondering where all your cash goes every month and you actually want to build something meaningful with your income, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that like button if this information helps you out. Here's something that might shock you. The average person has no clue what happens to their money after they get paid. They know their rent gets paid somehow, food appears in their kitchen, and their Netflix subscription magically renews itself. But beyond that, it's complete financial chaos. Like they're basically financial sleepwalkers stumbling through life wondering why they never have anything left over at the end of the month. The reality is that most people treat their paycheck like a surprise birthday gift, instead of treating it like the powerful wealth-building tool it actually is. They get excited when it arrives, spend most of it on random stuff they probably don't need, and then spend the next 2 weeks eating cereal for dinner and checking their bank balance obsessively. But successful people do something completely different. They have a system, they have a routine, and that routine starts the moment their paycheck arrives. It's not complicated, it's not sexy, and it definitely won't get you 1 million followers on social media, but it works. And it works so well that once you start doing it, you'll wonder how you ever manage your money any other way. The secret is understanding that your paycheck isn't just money you earned, it's your future financial freedom chopped up into monthly installments. Every dollar that comes into your account is a tiny building block that can either contribute to your wealth or disappear into the black hole of mindless spending. Most people approach their finances backwards. They pay all their bills, buy whatever they want, and then try to save whatever's left over. Spoiler alert, there's never anything left over. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a giant hole in the bottom and wondering why you can't hold any water. The people who actually build wealth flip this entire process on its head. They pay themselves first, allocate every dollar with intention, and make their money work as hard as they do to earn it. They understand that financial success isn't about making more money, although that certainly helps, right? It's about having a system that works regardless of how much you earn. Think about it this way. If you make $50,000 a year and you save and invest 10% of it consistently, you're going to be in better financial shape than someone who makes $100,000 a year but spends every penny they earn. The person making less money but following a system will retire comfortably, while the higher earner will be working until they're 80 because they never learned how to manage what they had. This brings us to the foundation of everything we're going to talk about today. Before you can build wealth, you need to know exactly where your money is going. And I mean exactly, not some vague idea about your major expenses, but a precise understanding of how every dollar gets allocated. The first step in our paycheck routine is something that sounds boring but is absolutely critical to your financial success. You need to determine what percentage of your income goes toward necessities. These are the things you literally cannot live without. We're talking about housing costs like rent or your mortgage payment, food that actually keeps you alive, basic transportation, essential utilities, and healthcare. Notice I didn't include your premium cable package, your gym membership you never use, or your subscription to 17 different streaming services. Those might feel necessary when you're binge watching your favorite show, but they're not actually required for your survival. Here's where most people get this completely wrong. They look at their expenses and convince themselves that everything is a necessity. That expensive car payment becomes essential transportation. The daily coffee shop visits become necessary fuel for productivity. The weekly restaurant meals become crucial social activities. But here's a reality check you probably don't want to hear. If you're spending more than 60% of your take-home pay on true necessities, you're either living somewhere too expensive for your income or you're calling luxuries necessities because it makes you feel better about your spending choices. Let me give you a real example that might help put this in perspective. Imagine someone earning $75,000 per year. After taxes, they're taking home roughly $4,750 each month. If their rent is $1,800, their car payment is $400, and they spend $500 on food, they're already at $2,700 in monthly expenses. That's about 57% of their take-home pay, which is actually pretty reasonable for someone living in a higher cost area. But here's where it gets interesting. That same person might look at their budget and think they're barely scraping by, especially if they're also paying for streaming services, eating out regularly, buying coffee every day, and making other small purchases that seem insignificant individually but add up to hundreds of dollars monthly. The key is being brutally honest about what you actually need versus what you want. Your future financial freedom depends on your ability to make this distinction clearly and consistently. Once you know your true necessity percentage, you'll know exactly how much money you have available for everything else. And everything else is where the magic happens. This is where you can start building wealth instead of just surviving paycheck to paycheck. The second critical step happens before you even think about spending money on anything fun or optional. You need to make sure you're staying current on any debt payments you might have. This isn't about paying off all your debt immediately, although that's certainly a worthy goal. This is about protecting your credit score and avoiding late fees that can destroy your financial progress. Your credit score is like your financial reputation. And in our current economic system, that reputation affects almost everything. It determines what interest rate you'll pay on a mortgage, whether you can qualify for a decent car loan, and sometimes even whether you can rent an apartment or get certain jobs. Here's something that might surprise you about credit scores. The difference between excellent credit management and terrible credit management often comes down to just one missed payment. If you make 99% of your payments on time, that's considered good. But if you drop to 97% on-time payments, your credit score tanks dramatically. Think about that for a second. In school, 97% would get you an A+. In credit scoring, it gets you labeled as a high-risk borrower. The credit system is unforgiving, but the rules are simple. Make your minimum payments on time every time, and your credit score will take care of itself. This step isn't glamorous and it won't make you feel wealthy, but it's absolutely essential for long-term financial success. Consider it the foundation that everything else gets built on top of. Now that we've covered the foundation, it's time to talk about something that most people completely ignore until it's too late: building an emergency fund. I know. Emergency funds are about as exciting as watching paint dry in slow motion. But stick with me here because this might be the most important part of your entire financial strategy. An emergency fund is exactly what it sounds like. It's money you set aside for when life decides to throw you a curveball. And trust me, life loves throwing curveballs. Your car breaks down the day before your big presentation. Your laptop dies right when you need it most. Your dog eats something expensive and needs emergency surgery, Tuesday. The goal is to have 3 to 6 months of your living expenses saved up in an account that you can access immediately, not invested in the stock market where it might lose value right when you need it most, not locked up in some certificate of deposit where you can't touch it for 6 months, just sitting there in a boring savings account ready to rescue you when everything goes wrong. Let's go back to our earlier example. If someone's monthly necessities cost $2,700, their emergency fund should be somewhere between $8,000 and $16,000. That might sound like an impossible amount of money to save, especially if you're currently living paycheck to paycheck. But remember, you're not trying to save it all at once. Here's the thing about emergency funds that nobody talks about. They're not just about the money, they're about peace of mind. When you have 3 to 6 months of expenses sitting in your savings account, you sleep differently at night. You walk into work with more confidence because you know that if something happens to your job, you won't be eating ramen noodles and living in your car next month. But here's where most people mess this completely up. They think their emergency fund needs to be earning amazing returns, so they invest it in risky assets or lock it up in accounts they can't access quickly. Then, when an actual emergency happens, their money is either worth less than when they put it in, or they can't get to it without paying penalties. Your emergency fund should be liquid and boring. Put it in a high-yield savings account that's insured by the government and call it a day. You're not trying to get rich off your emergency fund, you're trying to stay financially stable when life gets chaotic. Once your emergency fund is established, you've officially graduated from financial survival mode to wealth building mode. This is where things get interesting, and it's where most people start seeing real progress toward their financial goals. Step 4 is where you start investing for your future self, and this is where the magic of compound interest begins to work in your favor. If your employer offers any kind of retirement plan with matching contributions, this should be your absolute first priority for investing for your future. Think about employer matching like this. If your boss walked up to you every month and your 20s are basically financial quicksand. You're standing there watching everyone around you buy expensive cars they can't afford, taking out student loans for degrees that might land them a job at Starbucks, and somehow convincing themselves that avocado toast is a reasonable breakfast expense. Meanwhile, you're probably wondering if you should be doing something different with your money, or if you're destined to join the ranks of people who complain about being broke while simultaneously ordering DoorDash 3 times a week. Here's something that might shock you. The purchases you make in your 20s will determine whether you spend your 30s building wealth or still living paycheck to paycheck, like some sort of financial Groundhog Day. Most people get this completely backwards. They think their 20s are for spending money on experiences and stuff, and their 30s are for getting serious about money. That's like saying you'll start training for a marathon the day before the race. My name is Nick, and I've spent way too much time analyzing why some people escape the financial hamster wheel while others run on it their entire lives. If you're tired of watching your bank account balance hover around the same depressing number month after month, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button because today we're going to talk about the 7 purchases that can literally change the trajectory of your entire financial future. Now, before we dive into these 7 game-changing purchases, let me be crystal clear about something. I'm not a financial advisor, and this isn't financial advice. These are lessons I've learned from watching people succeed and fail with money, including my own experiences of making both smart moves and spectacularly dumb ones. What I'm sharing with you today are the purchases that consistently show up in the lives of people who achieve financial independence while they're still young enough to enjoy it. The reality is, most people approach their 20s completely backwards. They think this is the time to live it up, spend everything they earn, and worry about money later. But the people who understand compound interest know that your 20s are actually when small, smart decisions create massive results down the road. A $100 invested wisely at 25 becomes thousands at 50. A $100 spent on something that depreciates becomes nothing but a faded memory and maybe some debt. So let's start with purchase number 1. And this might surprise you because it's not something you buy once and forget about. It's an investment in a side hustle. Now, I know what you're thinking. Nick, a side hustle isn't really a purchase. But hear me out, because this is where most people get it wrong. They think side hustles are free, but the most successful ones require some upfront investment to get started properly. Whether it's buying equipment for photography, investing in a website domain and hosting, purchasing tools for a service business, or even just buying books and courses to learn a valuable skill, starting a side hustle almost always requires putting some money down first. And in your 20s, this might be the single best investment you can make because it has the potential to completely change your financial trajectory faster than anything else. The beautiful thing about side hustles in your 20s is that you probably don't have a mortgage, kids, or a bunch of other financial obligations weighing you down. You can take risks and try things that might not work out. If you fail, you can bounce back quickly. But if you succeed, you might never have to worry about money again. Here's what most people miss about side hustles though. They try to start something completely outside their wheelhouse instead of building on their existing strengths. If you're naturally good with cars, start there. If you understand websites and technology, build something in that space. If you can take decent photos, explore photography services. The point isn't to chase whatever seems most profitable online. The point is to find something that matches your skills and interests, then invest what it takes to do it properly. The second purchase that can change your life is investing in index funds, specifically through a Roth IRA or similar tax-advantaged account. This is where the magic of compound interest really shows its power, and your 20s are when you have the ultimate unfair advantage: time. Let me show you some math that might blow your mind. If you invest just $200 per month into an S&P 500 index fund starting at age 22, and that investment grows at the historical average of about 10% annually, you'll have over $1 million by the time you're 67. $200 a month for 45 years equals $1 million. That's less than $7 a day, creating millionaire status. But here's the kicker. If you wait until you're 32 to start that same investment plan, you'll end up with about $700,000 instead of $1 million. Waiting 10 years costs you $300,000 in the long run. This is why your 20s matter so much for building wealth. The beauty of index funds is that they're basically the boring, reliable friend of the investment world. They don't promise to make you rich overnight, and they won't give you exciting stories to tell at parties, but they consistently outperform most actively managed funds. They have low fees, and they spread your risk across hundreds of companies instead of betting everything on individual stocks. And if you do this through a Roth IRA, your gains grow completely tax-free. Every dollar of growth you earn stays in your pocket instead of going to Uncle Sam. It's like having a backup plan that runs quietly in the background while you focus on other things. The key is to automate these contributions so the money gets invested before you even see it in your checking account. If you never see it, you won't spend it. Purchase number 3 is something that might seem frivolous, but can actually be one of the smartest investments you make. Buy a plane ticket. Travel while you're young, but the right way. This isn't about blowing your savings on expensive vacations to look cool on social media. This is about investing in experiences and connections that can change your perspective and open doors you didn't even know existed. Traveling in your 20s builds confidence in ways that nothing else can. When you figure out how to navigate a foreign city, communicate despite language barriers, and solve problems in unfamiliar environments, you develop a kind of self-reliance that serves you for life. You also meet people from different backgrounds and industries who might become valuable connections down the road. The smart way to do this is by maximizing credit card points and rewards programs. Get a travel rewards credit card, use it for your normal expenses, and pay it off in full every single month. Never carry a balance, but collect those points and use them for free or heavily discounted travel. This strategy also helps you build a strong credit score, which becomes incredibly valuable when you're ready to buy a house or invest in real estate. The fourth life-changing purchase is education, but not the kind that puts you $100,000 in debt. I'm talking about books, online courses, workshops, and any other learning that increases your skills and value in the marketplace. This is honestly one of the most powerful investments you can make because the knowledge you gain compounds for decades. A $20 book can change your entire mindset about money and success. A few $100s spent on a legitimate course can teach you skills that increase your income by thousands. The key word here is legitimate. Avoid those $997 courses from people posing next to rented Lamborghinis. Instead, focus on learning from people who have actually built successful businesses or careers in areas you're interested in.
Your brain is most adaptable in your 20s, which means you can learn new skills faster than you'll ever be able to again. Take advantage of that. Whether it's learning to code, understanding digital marketing, developing sales skills, or mastering a trade, every skill you acquire becomes a part of your arsenal for the rest of your life. Purchase number 5 is the big one that scares most people in their 20s, but can absolutely transform your financial future. Buy real estate. Now, I know what you're thinking. Nick, I can barely afford ramen noodles, let alone a house. But hear me out, because there are creative ways to make this work even if you're not rolling in cash. Real estate accelerates wealth building through 3 main mechanisms. First, properties generally appreciate in value over time. Second, if you rent part of the property out, you get income that can help pay the mortgage. Third, you're using leverage, meaning you control a valuable asset with a relatively small down payment, and other people are essentially paying for your investment through rents. If affordability is an issue, consider house hacking. Buy a duplex and live in one unit while renting out the other, or buy a single-family home and rent out rooms to roommates. You could even explore short-term rentals through platforms like Airbnb if your local market supports it. The goal is to let other people pay your mortgage while you build equity and benefit from appreciation. It's not always easy, and it definitely requires more hands-on management than index fund investing, but the wealth-building potential is enormous. The 6th purchase might sound boring, but it's actually one of the most important financial decisions you'll make in your 20s. Buy cheap, reliable transportation. Notice I didn't say buy a car, I said buy transportation. There's a massive difference, and understanding this difference could save you literally hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. Most people in their 20s think they need a nice car to look successful. They finance $30,000 vehicles they can't afford, making payments that eat up a huge chunk of their income for 6 or 7 years. Meanwhile, that same money could be growing in investments, compounding into serious wealth by the time they're 40. Here's the brutal truth about cars. They are not investments. They're depreciating liabilities that cost you money every single month. The moment you drive a new car off the lot, it loses thousands of dollars in value. It's like lighting money on fire, except less fun and you still have to make payments. Instead, buy a 3 to 5-year-old Honda Civic, Toyota Corolla, or something similarly reliable for $10,000 to $15,000. Pay cash if you can, or finance it for the shortest term possible. These cars will run for 200,000 miles if you maintain them properly, and they're cheap to insure and repair. The money you save by not having a car payment can be invested instead. Let's say you avoid a $500 monthly car payment and invest that money at 8% returns. After 30 years, you'll have over $600,000. That's the real cost of having a car payment in your 20s. Not just the money you pay, but the money you didn't invest. Plus, when you're not stressed about making car payments, you have more freedom to take risks with your career. You can leave a job you hate, start that business, or take a position with growth potential but lower starting pay. Financial freedom starts with eliminating unnecessary monthly payments, and car payments are usually the biggest unnecessary expense people have. The 7th and final purchase that can change your life is investing in your health. This one gets overlooked.
Picture this scenario. You're lying awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, and your mind is racing through every possible financial disaster that could strike tomorrow. Your car could break down, your laptop might die, you could lose your job, maybe your pet needs emergency surgery. Sound familiar? Well, what if I told you there's a specific dollar amount that could eliminate almost all of these midnight anxiety sessions and fundamentally transform how you navigate through life? Most people think financial milestones are just arbitrary numbers that rich people made up to make the rest of us feel inadequate. But here's something that might surprise you. There's actual psychology and mathematics behind why certain amounts of money create dramatic shifts in your day-to-day existence. And the first real game changer isn't $1 million or even $100,000. It's $10,000. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, human psychology, and why some people seem to glide through financial challenges while others are constantly stressed about their bank account balance. If you've ever wondered what it actually feels like to have different amounts of money saved up, and more importantly, how each milestone changes your decision-making process, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps clarify things for you. Now, before we dive into what makes $10,000 so special, let me paint you a picture of what life looks like without it.
You know that feeling when you're at the grocery store and you're mentally calculating whether you can afford the name brand cereal or if you need to stick with the generic version that tastes like cardboard? Or when your friend suggests going out to dinner and you have to come up with some creative excuse because you can't admit that $25 for a meal would mess up your entire budget for the week. This is the reality for millions of people who are living paycheck to paycheck. Every financial decision becomes a careful calculation. Every unexpected expense feels like a potential catastrophe. You're constantly playing defense with your money instead of being able to make proactive choices about your future. But here's where things get interesting. There's a specific psychological phenomenon that happens when you accumulate your first $10,000, and it has nothing to do with being able to buy expensive things. In fact, most people who reach this milestone don't dramatically change their spending habits at all. The real transformation is much more subtle and much more powerful. The first thing that changes is your relationship with risk. When you have zero savings, every decision feels dangerous. Taking a new job, moving to a different city, or even planning a vacation becomes this massive source of stress because you know that one wrong move could leave you financially devastated. But when you have $10,000 saved in your account, suddenly these same decisions feel manageable. You're not necessarily going to quit your job tomorrow and become a professional juggler, but you might finally have the confidence to ask for that promotion you've been thinking about for months. You might be willing to invest in yourself by taking a course or certification that could boost your earning potential. The safety net doesn't make you reckless, but it does give you permission to think beyond just surviving until the next paycheck. There's also something fascinating that happens to your brain chemistry when you see a five-figure balance in your bank account for the first time. Neuroscientists have found that financial security actually reduces cortisol levels, which is your body's primary stress hormone. This means that reaching $10,000 doesn't just change your finances, it literally changes how your body responds to daily challenges. Think about the last time you had a minor car problem. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, that check engine light might as well be a countdown timer to financial disaster. You're immediately stressed about how you're going to pay for repairs, whether you'll need to put it on a credit card, or if you'll have to borrow money from family. But when you have $10,000 saved, that same check engine light becomes a simple inconvenience. You're annoyed, sure, but you're not panicked. This shift from panic to mild annoyance might seem small, but it has ripple effects throughout your entire life. When you're not constantly worried about money, you make better decisions in general. You sleep better, you're more productive at work, you're more patient with your family and friends. Financial stress affects every aspect of human behavior, and removing that stress unlocks mental energy that you can redirect toward actually improving your situation. But here's something that most people don't realize about the $10,000 milestone. The majority of the benefit doesn't come from spending the money. It comes from knowing the money is there. This is what financial experts call the emergency fund effect, and it's probably one of the most underrated concepts in personal finance. An emergency fund isn't really about the emergencies. It's about the peace of mind that comes from knowing you can handle emergencies. Most people who build up $10,000 in savings never actually spend it on emergencies. Instead, they spend it on opportunities. They invest in education, they start businesses, they move to better locations, or they simply have the mental bandwidth to focus on increasing their income because they're not constantly worried about basic survival. There's also something fascinating that happens to your brain chemistry when you see a five-figure balance in your bank account for the first time. Neuroscientists have found that financial security actually reduces cortisol levels, which is your body's primary stress hormone. This means that reaching $10,000 doesn't just change your finances, it literally changes how your body responds to daily challenges. Think about the last time you had a minor car problem. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, that check engine light might as well be a countdown timer to financial disaster. You're immediately stressed about how you're going to pay for repairs, whether you'll need to put it on a credit card, or if you'll have to borrow money from family. But when you have $10,000 saved, that same check engine light becomes a simple inconvenience. You're annoyed, sure, but you're not panicked. This shift from panic to mild annoyance might seem small, but it has ripple effects throughout your entire life. When you're not constantly worried about money, you make better decisions in general. You sleep better, you're more productive at work, you're more patient with your family and friends. Financial stress affects every aspect of human behavior, and removing that stress unlocks mental energy that you can redirect toward actually improving your situation. But here's something that most people don't realize about the $10,000 milestone. The majority of the benefit doesn't come from spending the money. It comes from knowing the money is there. This is what financial experts call the emergency fund effect, and it's probably one of the most underrated concepts in personal finance. An emergency fund isn't really about the emergencies. It's about the peace of mind that comes from knowing you can handle emergencies. Most people who build up $10,000 in savings never actually spend it on emergencies. Instead, they spend it on opportunities. They invest in education, they start businesses, they move to better locations, or they simply have the mental bandwidth to focus on increasing their income because they're not constantly worried about basic survival. There's also something fascinating that happens to your brain chemistry when you see a five-figure balance in your bank account for the first time. Neuroscientists have found that financial security actually reduces cortisol levels, which is your body's primary stress hormone. This means that reaching $10,000 doesn't just change your finances, it literally changes how your body responds to daily challenges. Think about the last time you had a minor car problem. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, that check engine light might as well be a countdown timer to financial disaster. You're immediately stressed about how you're going to pay for repairs, whether you'll need to put it on a credit card, or if you'll have to borrow money from family. But when you have $10,000 saved, that same check engine light becomes a simple inconvenience. You're annoyed, sure, but you're not panicked. This shift from panic to mild annoyance might seem small, but it has ripple effects throughout your entire life. When you're not constantly worried about money, you make better decisions in general. You sleep better, you're more productive at work, you're more patient with your family and friends. Financial stress affects every aspect of human behavior, and removing that stress unlocks mental energy that you can redirect toward actually improving your situation. But here's something that most people don't realize about the $10,000 milestone. The majority of the benefit doesn't come from spending the money. It comes from knowing the money is there. This is what financial experts call the emergency fund effect, and it's probably one of the most underrated concepts in personal finance. An emergency fund isn't really about the emergencies. It's about the peace of mind that comes from knowing you can handle emergencies. Most people who build up $10,000 in savings never actually spend it on emergencies. Instead, they spend it on opportunities. They invest in education, they start businesses, they move to better locations, or they simply have the mental bandwidth to focus on increasing their income because they're not constantly worried about basic survival. There's also something fascinating that happens to your brain chemistry when you see a five-figure balance in your bank account for the first time. Neuroscientists have found that financial security actually reduces cortisol levels, which is your body's primary stress hormone. This means that reaching $10,000 doesn't just change your finances, it literally changes how your body responds to daily challenges. Think about the last time you had a minor car problem. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, that check engine light might as well be a countdown timer to financial disaster. You're immediately stressed about how you're going to pay for repairs, whether you'll need to put it on a credit card, or if you'll have to borrow money from family. But when you have $10,000 saved, that same check engine light becomes a simple inconvenience. You're annoyed, sure, but you're not panicked. This shift from panic to mild annoyance might seem small, but it has ripple effects throughout your entire life. When you're not constantly worried about money, you make better decisions in general. You sleep better, you're more productive at work, you're more patient with your family and friends. Financial stress affects every aspect of human behavior, and removing that stress unlocks mental energy that you can redirect toward actually improving your situation. But here's something that most people don't realize about the $10,000 milestone. The majority of the benefit doesn't come from spending the money. It comes from knowing the money is there. This is what financial experts call the emergency fund effect, and it's probably one of the most underrated concepts in personal finance. An emergency fund isn't really about the emergencies. It's about the peace of